The Donald Trump criminal trial week 2 is in the books, and Karen Freeman, Agnifilo, and I are here to break down everything that went down in court today, and we'll talk about everything that went down this week as well. Thank you for joining our special coverage here on the Midas Touch Network and Legal AF of the criminal trial against Donald Trump in Manhattan for his falsification of business records to interfere with the 2016 election. Every day we keep making this scorecard so we can give you a summary of everything that went down in trial for each specific day. We're up to Trump trial day 8. We are in week 2. Here are the notable events that went down on Friday. Pecker finishes his testimony. Rona Graph testified for a short period of time. Then we had the testimony of Gary Farrow, and Trump continued to whine about courtroom. We could start in reverse order. We'll start with Donald Trump showing up and constantly whining about the temperature in the courtroom. Let's play this clip of Donald Trump whining. Let's play it.
So we have another day of court in a freezing courthouse. It's very cold in there, on purpose, I believe. They don't seem to be able to get the temperature up. It shouldn't be that complicated, but we have a freezing courthouse, and that's fine. That's just fine. Let them keep handing it out. There's a rigged trial. Thank you very much, everybody.
That's actually a joke right there. That one was created by @Tarkeen Helmet. Shout out and hat tip there. Let me show you the actual. Sometimes I could be a little immature, Karen, but that's why we have you here to bring us back to what was going on in the court. This was actually what Donald Trump said. Play the clip.
So we have another day of court in a freezing courthouse. It's very cold in there, on purpose, I believe. They don't seem to be able to get the temperature up. It shouldn't be that complicated, but we have a freezing courthouse, and that's fine. That's just fine. Let them keep handing it out. There's a rigged trial. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Just wait. You know, I never realized how weak he is. You know, I've been sitting outside with the reporters at CNN because they sit outside all day long to cover this trial. And on those freezing cold days, I cannot believe how they sit outside in the freezing cold all day long when they're on assignment, wherever it is, whether it's covering hurricanes or covering Trump's trial or whatever it is. And they're outside for hours and hours and hours, and he's complaining about air conditioning. I mean, you know, he could like maybe wear layers or something. What a whiner. It's just so strange. Yeah, it's a government building that I worked in for 30 years. The heat is terrible. The cold is terrible. The bathrooms suck. That's what it is. That's what people go through in the real world who don't have gold toilets. Like, the fact that he whines about it is just so incredibly just irritating to me.
Whining outside of the courtroom. Let's talk about what went down inside the courtroom today, Karen. Can you maybe give a summary of what went down today? Then any surprises? How do you think the prosecution did? How do you think the defense did? Let's start there. Talk about today, and then maybe we then do a little bit of a rewind and remind everybody about what happened this week. But let's start today with those witnesses listed on our day 8 recap scorecard.
Yeah, so I woke up this morning. I had a terrible headache, and I still have a terrible headache. And I think it's because I was so upset that the Harvey Weinstein reversal happened yesterday and that it was buried, and I think intentionally buried on a news day where the Court of Appeals knew that there was going to be this split screen between the Supreme Court oral arguments and the presidential immunity and this New York Trump trial. And otherwise, why did it have to come down on Thursday? Anyone who all I can say is it sets the Me Too movement, sexual assault, and women back to a place that I thought was long ago gone. You read the 4-3 decision, and it's really disappointing, really upsetting for survivors of sexual assault. The scathing dissents, I'll tell you, read the dissent, especially the one by Judge Singas, and you'll understand what the issue is. And it's just really, it gives me a headache. It's really upsetting. Sometimes I just can't believe where we are in this world. And the other thing that's upsetting about it is, let's see if it impacts this particular trial that we're having. We talked about it yesterday, but the more I think about it, the Molyneux rulings here about Karen McDougal and Dino Sajudin, the doorman, those are prior bad acts that are being offered to come into this case. And the judge allowed them in because he found that they were relevant to proving Trump's motive and intent, which is one of the times when you can bring in prior bad act evidence. So I am sure the judge is reading this terrible decision that I don't understand why more people aren't up in arms and talking about. And the reason I'm bringing it up is because I want to unbury it from the news cycle, and I want people to read it and realize what an atrocity this is for survivors of sexual assault. Anyhow, so I hope it doesn't also infect and impact this particular trial and this judge's Molyneux ruling. Well, the other notable thing that
Karen, before going into today too, so people know, they may be thinking, hey, New York, how is this happening with the New York, the top court is called the Court of Appeal, is like the Supreme Court, so people don't get confused. But the top court, the Court of Appeal in New York, actually, isn't it a 4-3 conservative kind of right-wing court in New York, where there's 4 who stick together and make these types of rulings?
Yes and no. I mean, I'll tell you, the judge who wrote the majority opinion is so far left that it just makes no sense. This whole thing makes no sense. I think they're so far left that they think they're protecting the rights of the accused as opposed to women's rights. And it's this particular ruling, yes, it's very politicized, the Court of Appeals. And look, there's some phenomenal judges on there. And normally I have so much respect for this court. This is nothing like the Supreme Court of the United States that truly has, in my opinion, has legitimacy issues. The New York Court of Appeals is not like that typically, but this decision is just beyond atrocious. And I think sometimes the far left, frankly, who want to protect the rights of the accused, which is important, obviously, but to do it when it's appropriate and necessary. But in this particular case and this particular ruling, the decision, like I said, it just misunderstands the nature of sexual assault, and it misunderstands women who don't always necessarily behave the way the movies and television shows depict what a perfect rape victim looks like and acts like. It's more complicated than that, right? And a lot of people understand that in real life. And that's why sometimes when it is more complicated than that, when maybe women don't act the way you think they should act, but they acted the way they felt they had to act. And there's so much evidence and new research and anecdote, both actual scientific evidence, but also anecdotal evidence and experience that has shown and demonstrated and proven how it's not necessarily always the case that women respond the way the movies and Hollywood wants you to respond, right? So that you're the perfect rape victim. And so what happens is when the defense says, oh, she consented, and because she did all these things to consent, and she called me the next day, and she still spoke to me, and she still told me she loved me, there was some of that evidence in this case, and it's complicated. And then that doesn't mean that it wasn't sexual assault. It doesn't mean it wasn't with a lack of consent. And so when the defense says, yes, but we're going consent, then guess what? There's federally, by the way, this would have been allowed in. There's Federal Rule of Evidence, Rule 413, and most states would allow it in. It's just New York that is behind the times, said, oh no, it could go towards the propensity because of all these women. Well, guess what? When in the Harvey Weinstein case, the prosecutor, Jonah Luzzi, who's one of the best prosecutors that there's ever been, she found all these victims and she wanted to bring them in to prove intent, that it's all the same. They all did the same. And it was the same pattern. It was the same. He did the same things to everybody. He manipulated them the same way. And so she wanted to bring them all in. No, the judge compromised and only let 3 of the dozens in. And it was to prove motive and intent. But this court of appeals said, no, that was unfair. And the way they described it said, and what the decision said, and I'm sorry to hijack this and talking about this case, but I'm truly concerned that it's going to also affect this case because it is so backwards and so terrible. But let's go back to the reason people are listening. Like I said, I want people to revive this in the news, and I want people to be outraged because I think it's an outrageous decision. But this particular case, what happened today is they finished the cross-examination of David Pecker along with redirect and then recross, and so which is what you can do. And the way that works is direct examination is, say, this big, right? It's all of the stuff that happens between here and here. Cross-examination has to be about these things. You can't cross about other things other than, like, say, credibility, but you can't bring in things that are outside the scope of direct. And then redirect has to, so let's say you cross this much stuff, redirect can only be about stuff that was cross-examined about, right? And then recross can only be about the stuff that was redirected about. It's all these little rules. So that's what happened today. And there was some of that today on both sides. And, interestingly, the defense took an interesting tactic with David Pecker because one can imagine that Donald Trump and his lawyers, they're not shy. They're pretty aggressive people. And Donald Trump goes on the warpath against his enemies and against people he views are potentially his foes. And they could have taken that tack, and that happens a lot, with cross-examination, where you just go after the person. But for whatever reason, tactically, they decided rather than doing that, they're going to use the government's witness as their own and use that witness to prove their own defense. So they're going to embrace that witness. They also pointed out a few inconsistencies here and there, and they tried to normalize the catch and kill, and all the stuff that they did for Donald Trump, promoting stories and suppressing stories and that sort of thing. They tried to normalize it by showing how they did it to others, to other politicians, to other celebrities, and that this wasn't election related. There was nothing unusual about this. David Pecker pushed back, though. He really held his own, and he said, yeah, but never this amount of money, never did $150,000. Like, this was on a different scale. This was all about getting him elected president. So I thought he was very effective in that way. But again, rather than really just trying to destroy David Pecker's credibility, who knows? Some people have surmised that it's because David Pecker knows where all the bodies are buried for Donald Trump. And if they push too hard, that could backfire on Donald Trump, but who knows the real reason. But instead they did, I thought, a pretty effective job at embracing him and using him to ask questions that supported his Donald Trump's defense. And the defense is starting to take shape, which is that they're not disputing the facts very much. Instead, what they're doing is they're taking the prosecutor's facts and saying they don't mean what the prosecution says they mean something different. So, for example, the prosecution's second witness was Rona Graph, or Rana. I'm not sure how you pronounce her name. And she is a long-term executive assistant for Donald Trump at the Trump Organization. I think she said something like 34 years. And she clearly still has great affection for Trump. They smiled at each other, and she said she loved working there. She loves Trump. They used her to humanize him and really make him seem like a really good guy, and someone great to work for. And so again, they didn't attack her. They used her to humanize him. And the reason the prosecution called her was, I think, to show, first of all, his calendar entries. There's certain significant dates in his calendar, and she was the keeper of the calendar. And so they wanted to establish those and get those into evidence, but also the fact that he had Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal's contact information. And if so, because, Trump has said over and over, he doesn't know Stormy Daniels. This never happened. He had nothing to do with her. And so the prosecution's like, well, then why would you have her contact information? Right. And she had the contact information for both of them. It wasn't in some general contact information. She had it like they were something special. But the Trump organization, the Trump lawyer, Susan Necheles, was cross-examining her and was like, yeah, but who did you think Stormy Daniels and these people were? And she thought they were contestants for Celebrity Apprentice. And so again, took the same set of facts and made them their own. And what their defense is going to be like, yeah, he knew these people. He had all kinds of colorful people because they were all on Celebrity Apprentice. And so they're trying to neutralize what seems like really powerful evidence. Still pretty powerful, but that's what their defense is, how it's taking shape. And they're going to attack the credibility of Michael Cohen and Stormy Daniels because he's already said he was going to, and that's what he's been doing all along. So they're saving their harsh cross for those two. And I think everyone else, they're going to just be like, yeah, this was what we did, but there was nothing nefarious about it, nothing wrong, nothing illegal. This is just the business, the way we conducted business. And again, that's just their tactic, and their defense is shaping up. After a lot of people were asking who's going to testify after Pecker and who's going to be the next witness. And I predicted that it was going to be someone who was just no one you've ever really heard of that's going to establish certain business records. And sure enough, that's who it was. It was Rona Graph. She wasn't on for very long. And then another individual who worked for a bank that Michael Cohen utilized to establish the account that ultimately paid Stormy Daniels. Again, just witnesses that you have to use to establish these facts, nothing blockbuster significant. And the reason I surmise that would be the case is, as a prosecutor, knowing that Pecker could go half the day or most of the day, you'll have an hour or two at the end of the day. You're not going to want to put on a blockbuster witness, get them started, and then have the jury forget what they said for the next 3 days because there's no court Saturday, Sunday, or Monday, and not give the defense chance to prepare Saturday, Sunday, and Monday for cross-examination. So I'm not surprised that this is how they're doing it. They're splitting up the trial. They're allowing different lawyers to direct and cross all the witnesses. So far, we've had Matt Colangelo gave the opening. He came from the Department of Justice and worked with Alvin Bragg in the Attorney General's office. Then Josh Steinglass, who I would say is one of the co-lead lawyers, he did the first witness. He did the direct examination of David Pecker, and then Susan Hoffinger, who's the other co-lead prosecutor, she did the direct examination of Rona Graph, and then a slightly more junior assistant DA did the direct examination of the banker. And so they're really spreading it out. Her name's Rebecca Mangold. And they're giving people a chance to all learn how to be trial lawyers and to participate in the trial, which I think is a really good thing. And then Chris Conroy, who's also somebody I know, he's the one who's been dealing with the gag order issue. Speaking of which, we still don't have a decision on the gag order, which is sort of interesting to think, why is the not doing anything? Why is he not saying anything? Why is he not ruling? Well, I think because he's seeing that it has somewhat of an effect. All Donald Trump can talk about is how freezing it is in that courtroom. He's not necessarily going after the witnesses or the jurors anymore. So maybe the fear of what he's going to do is more powerful than a few $1,000s, which Donald Trump might say is worth it if he can criticize people. So that's what happened today, and there's no court on Monday. Tuesday, they will resume with this bank individual. I think his last name's Faro, and we just don't know who comes after that.
So, Karen, who do you think, how would you think about this full week of trial? Who's in the lead, if you will? How would you characterize? How's the prosecution doing? How's the defense lawyers doing? From the prosecution standpoint, are any reason that they should be worried right now that this tactic that you're talking about by the defense of neutralizing some of these witnesses is being effective on the jury. Put yourself in the shoes of a prosecutor. And for those who are tuning in and don't know KFA or Karen Freeman Agnifilo's background, she was the number 2 at the district attorney's office. She worked at that office for nearly 30 years and at times was the acting district attorney. You were before Justice Merchan. You've tried many cases in that courtroom. So if you can, put yourself back on that table, the prosecution side. What are you thinking right now heading into next week?
I would feel great. I would have been very worried about David Pecker if I was the prosecutor, and this is why. Whenever you have a witness, like there's one thing that you can have, like a stranger, right? You could have a 2 people who don't know each other, and there's some kind of stranger does something to another stranger. It's really just about when they go to on the stand. It's really just about the facts of the case, right? And that's what you have. But when you have 2 people who have a 30 plus year history, especially a history like the one Donald Trump and David Pecker had, I mean, David Pecker talked about some extremely colorful characters, and David Pecker knows where everybody's bodies are buried. I mean, that man has done a lot of favors for a lot of people. As the prosecutor, no matter how much you prep him, I'd be worried, what don't I know? What does Donald Trump know that I don't know? And what's going to come out to hurt me? And you're going to be a little bit worried. Again, no matter how much you prep them, no matter how many questions you ask, you still worry. You're never going to know everything that Donald Trump knows about David Pecker. And so the fact that there was no blockbuster anything, there was nothing horrendous, there was nothing I don't think they really accomplished anything through David Pecker in terms of their cross-examination. I think the direct was crushing for Donald Trump. I mean, this was all about the election. There's no doubt. There's never a mention of Melania. And David Pecker, I think, is going to corroborate what the other witnesses, including Michael Cohen, is expected to say. So I do think that's great for the prosecutor. That being said, it's not when the jury goes back and they deliberate, it's not about whose side do you believe more. Do you believe this one or do you believe that one? It's not like you get 2 stories and you pick one. There's one story and you get to decide. You have to decide, did they prove that story beyond a reasonable doubt, right? It's not that, because they don't have to prove the other story. The defense doesn't have to prove their story beyond a reasonable doubt. They just have to create some doubt. And so to the extent that 1 or 2 people buys that argument, about, well, this is what he does, this is his business model, you worry a little bit about that, generally speaking. But that being said, and that's in every trial, it's hard to be a prosecutor beyond a reasonable doubt. Every trial I've ever had, and I only had 1 acquittal. Every trial I ever had was at the time that you put your evidence in, no matter how good it goes in. When that jury comes back, when they say you have a verdict and you're standing there waiting for your verdict to come in, I mean, it's like you can feel your heart beating in your throat. It's the most terrifying feeling, because when you're done with your case, after the defense does their summation, by the way, that was also the worst feeling ever, is after the defense does their summation first and then you do your summation. I always needed a break in between because I had to go to the bathroom and cry because the defense summation pokes all the holes in your case. I mean, and all of a sudden you hear all the problems, and every case has some problems, and defense attorneys are good and they can make arguments. And then you have to pull yourself together, and you did your summation and you're prepared, and you go back and then you remind yourself and the jury that you have a case. But then the judge reads the charge, and the beyond a reasonable doubt, it's a high standard. It's not, it's a very high standard. And so when they come back and they say guilty, it's nerve-wracking. And like I said, I've had 1 full acquittal. It happens, especially if you're going to try tough cases and you're going to be a trial lawyer. You can't win all of them. So, but I think, just as a trial lawyer, as a former prosecutor, I think this was a home run week for the prosecution, at least a triple, but I would say home run.
And Karen, you're also a correspondent on CNN. You know people in that office as well. You are on a panel with people who are in the courtroom. You're also in the legal community there, and a prominent person. Are you getting any feedback from anything that's really not being reported about what's going on in the courtroom, the general vibe in the courtroom that you're able to share? And obviously nothing specific about the jurors, or do they seem to be engaged? Are you hearing anything about that process that
Yeah.
maybe is, tell us about
Yeah,
that?
I've heard a lot about that. So everyone in the courtroom is commenting and reporting on how astute and how into it the jury seems to be, which is good. They describe it's like a tennis match. When someone asks a question, they look at them. When someone answers, they look at them. They're really engaged in the trial. So the jury seems to be very, very much paying attention, which is, I think, fantastic. You want that. You want a jury that's really engaged and listening. Nobody else has complained about it being cold. All the people in the courtroom, which I found interesting. You would think that people would complain, given how much Donald Trump is complaining about it. You would think that would be a universal sentiment. I haven't asked anyone, is it really as cold as he says? But I've never heard anyone complain about it. And certainly people are coming back, but it seems to be an issue for Donald Trump. They say it's interesting. It's fascinating. They said that the general members of the general public have come in. That they met these tourists from Utah who just happened to come down and wanted to watch the trial, and there was room. They could come in, and they got there early, and so there are people coming in and out. And the general vibes, people are paying attention, and people are into it, and they think the evidence is going really well. Donald Trump is behaving, which is, totally different from his other trials. He is not behaving the way he did during the Each and Carroll cases or during the Arthur and Goron case at all. I mean, he is like every other criminal defendant. He sits there and he has to listen, and he is not fighting with the judge. He is not pissing off the jury. He smiled at the woman who testified today. So he is absolutely changed his tune. And so that's what I've heard so far. But it's apparently fascinating. I would love to go down and watch.
And finally, next week, remind everybody why there's no court on Monday, and then what witnesses are you looking to testify next week?
I actually don't know why there's no court on Monday, to be honest. I just know that there isn't. But I'm not sure why there's no court on Monday. I think they're going to do a few more of these types of witnesses, the witnesses that are going to establish certain dates and documents and things like that, because the big blockbuster witnesses you're going to want to put certain things into evidence through them, and you're not going to want to have it be subject to connection. So the jury right now, they got they got the whole story. They got the picture, right? They've been opening statements, so they know what the evidence is going to show. Then they got David Pecker, who was just the most brilliant first witness to put on, because he painted the whole picture. The jury knows the world. He created the world that the trial is living in. And he really set the tone for frankly, how sleazy the world Donald Trump lived in, and the people he ran with and who his friends were. And the news business that Donald Trump was in bed with, frankly, and that he utilized and weaponized to ultimately get what he wanted, to suppress information from the American people. I think next you're going to get a lot of these kind of witnesses that are going to establish bank accounts and documents and court calendar dates and those sorts of things, so that when the witnesses that have the real substance are coming, then I think all of that stuff will be established. Those witnesses, jurors have no idea why some of these things are important, but it'll become more relevant next week. And we'll see what they do. They could go in chronological order. And they could start with the doorman, Karen McDougal, and Stormy Daniels and call them as witnesses. I'm not sure if they're going to do that. I don't even know if they're going to call all three of those witnesses or any of them. They don't really need them. So that'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that. I don't know if Michael Cohen is at what point they're going to put him on, but obviously he's a critical witness. I think they're going to get as much out and establish as many facts that are not in dispute before they put him on, so that his testimony is really limited, right? There's only going to be a few things that are in dispute. So it'll be interesting to see what they do and who comes next.
And Karen, with the criminal charge here, this falsification of the business records, how do you authenticate? Ultimately, we know that Donald Trump basically signed those checks that were eventually made to Cohen. We know how Cohen funneled that money to Stormy Daniels, but how ultimately do you kind of make the connection if Trump doesn't testify, because he has a Fifth Amendment right not to testify? So how are you as a prosecutor, how do you make that connection? And maybe you can just tell our viewers as well, when you say you really don't need Stormy Daniels or McDougal or whoever, I mean, it kind of comes down to, was the business records falsified? How do you react when Donald Trump says it was just a ledger? My accountant did it. Some lawyers did it. I wasn't responsible for that ledger. If Trump isn't testifying, what do you do as a prosecutor to say it's your responsibility, though? How do you handle that?
So it's a couple of things. First of all, whoever was in the room, like, did an assistant take the invoice with the checks and bring it over to Donald Trump, or did, Michael Cohen or somebody like that? You're going to want those people will testify about it, right? You're going to also put people on who talk about his business practices. Like David Pecker said, someone would bring him an invoice with a check because he was the signatory on the check, and David Pecker said that Donald Trump would look at the invoices and would really meticulously go through them. He was very meticulous with numbers. So I'd want to put as many people on to corroborate that fact as possible. All the people who worked with him and show how not only was he frugal, but he was also meticulous with numbers. He wasn't just someone who would sign things and not realize what they were, what he was signing. So I would put on as many of those witnesses as I could. But the particular checks in issue, I think there were 11 of them. I think that's going to boil down to Michael Cohen, whoever was involved in bringing those checks to the White House to get them signed. That's going to be a critical witness. And then the people because they're going to have seen him sign it and they're going to have taken it and brought it back. And then the people at the bank who will testify as a business record. There are certain business record exceptions that you put documents into evidence through, that you get someone from the bank to testify that this is a business record and that this was Donald Trump's account and this was, et cetera, et cetera. And then whatever Michael Cohen did with it in his account, you'll have to call his bankers too, because the money, the check will go into one of Michael Cohen's shell accounts, and then to whatever the trail is, it goes bank back to Donald Trump. All of those banks will have to have someone testify to the trail of the money. That is the most boring part of the testimony. And a lot of white collar cases, the defense and prosecution will stipulate to those facts, because nobody wants to sit there and listen to that, and nobody's really going to argue with it, but you have to establish it, you have to prove it. But I have a feeling no one's stipulating to anything in this case, because that's just, they want to be difficult. But it's like watching paint dry. It's just, really boring.
Well, what's not really boring, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, is watching your updates each and every day of the criminal trial. I just want to say what an honor it is to have you give your analysis with all of your experience at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Thank you so much for sharing it with us here on Legal AF, on the Midas Touch Network. And for all of those watching, remember to hit subscribe to the YouTube channel. It is 100% free to subscribe to the Midas Touch YouTube channel. So hit subscribe now. You may think you're subscribed, but you may not actually be subscribed just because you get the videos a lot. Hit subscribe, and that'll make sure that you get all these videos and all the alerts whenever we're going live. So tomorrow on Saturday, we will have an episode of Legal AF as well. Legal AF will take place at its normal time, 8 Eastern and 5 Pacific. So make sure you all watch Legal AF with Michael Popak and myself. Again, that's every Saturday at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. We'll be live tomorrow breaking down this week's developments, as well as the Supreme Court's oral argument, as well as the federal judge in the E. Jean Carroll case rejecting Donald Trump's motion for a new trial in a scathing order. That and more tomorrow on Legal AF, live here on the Midas Touch YouTube channel. Once again, that's 8 Eastern and 5 Pacific. Make sure you all are subscribed to Legal AF wherever you get your audio podcast. I mean, there's 21,000 people watching this live right now that would fill the Madison Square Garden plus extra seats. So if everybody here were to join Legal AF audio podcast, that goes a huge way to help the growth of the audio podcast as well. And it's fun to listen to Karen and Popak and hopefully a little bit myself on that audio podcast. So just search Legal AF wherever you listen to podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you want to help grow this independent media platform, you can do that at patreon.com/Midas Touch, patreon.com/Midas Touch. There's also patreon.com/Legal AF as well, which has some of Professor Popak's teachings on that. So it's patreon.com/Midas Touch and patreon.com/Legal AF. All right, everybody, we are going to go right now. Check back on Tuesday morning. Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, and I will be live again in the morning before trial, again in the afternoon. Tell friends, coworker, family members, neighbors about this network, about breakdowns. We would love for them to join this community as well. And we're going to also have, I want to remind you too, that we have a bunch of other YouTube channels that are in the Midas Touch family of channels, like Tennessee Brando, who has a live coming up, which you can check out that live in a bit. We have the Tennessee Brando YouTube channel, so you can always subscribe there. We have the Adam Mockler YouTube channel, our Gen Z host. You can check that out. We have the Talking Feds YouTube channel with Harry Littman, which is great. We have Coalition of the Sane with former Congress member Denver Riggleman is great. And so right now, as we conclude our coverage, you'll all be sent to one of our hosts, Tennessee Brando. Check out his live stream. I think you will all love his analysis. And when you get to Tennessee Brando's room, tell him we say hi and make sure you subscribe to Tennessee Brando's YouTube channel. He's on his way to 200,000 subs. Finally, I want to wish everyone a great weekend, a restful weekend, and I want to thank you all for watching. Karen, Michael Popak, myself, we are all so grateful for you, for your support, for your trust in our coverage. We really appreciate it. Karen, anything else you want to say before we go?
I'm just so appreciative of everybody, and I'm read the comments, and I'm just listening to what people are saying and reading what people are saying, and I'm just so appreciative for all the support and just the people are here listening and watching, and it helps keep us going because this is exhausting. I'm exhausted.
Well, everybody, tell Tennessee Brando we say hello. Karen Friedman, Agnifilo, thank you. We'll see you next time. Shout out to the Legal AFers and shout out to the Midas Mighty. Have a great weekend.
Enough! Send it to the big house, not the White House. Get the new exclusive tees, mugs, and stickers right now at store.midastouch.com. That's store.midastouch.com.